takeaway? Obviously, we know that revenue was far and away better than expected, and that was driven by services and not the iPhone.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is Apple isn't going to suffer as much as some of the other retailers when it comes to having their stores closed. When it comes to consumer electronics, more than 50% of those purchases are made online. And, we believe that the strongest impact that the stores have is really influencing those online sales. And so many consumers, like 41% of consumers we've surveyed, have shifted their spending from in-store to online since the beginning of the pandemic. A couple of the other shifts that we're seeing, too, we've seen a net increase in the percentage of consumers willing to do things like try contactless payments or digital payments for the first time, almost 20%. And then certainly if you look at some of the announcements, while Apple didn't break out their Apple Plus TV, when you look at someone like Netflix, doubling the number of net new subscribers they've added, you'd have to imagine that Apple has benefited from that shift in spending as well.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the supply chain. I always try to get some insight from Cook on future products, and that's the one thing that they never give. But I did ask whether some of these issues would impact the coming pipeline. So we're expecting potentially 4 new phones to be unveiled later this year. I asked, will the pandemic be impacting products in 2020, perhaps even 2021 or 2022? And what he said is we couldn't be more proud of our current lineup, and we're as excited as ever about the pipeline. He highlighted the 3 products that they've been able to push out over the last few weeks, and then also said we've rapidly built the muscle to run the company from this kind of way, indicating that he didn't seem to see any significant issues in the supply chain, and that they can continue to produce and release new products, and that he's fairly confident about their ability to continue to do that. Now, to your point about stores, the big question is, when will Apple reopen stores? Because Apple does seem to be a trigger or an indicator that other retailers might follow. He said by the first half of May, somewhere in that ballpark, I think the initial stores in the U.S. will open. Just a few, not a large number. We're going to look at the data and make a decision, city by city, county by county, depending on the circumstances in that particular place. We will not be the first to reopen probably anywhere. He said they want to make sure that it's more than safe before these stores reopen. But they are also planning to reopen stores in Austria, in Europe, in Australia as well. And they have the learnings from China, where they've already reopened stores. Julie, what do you think that means, given that, I'm in the Bay Area. We have our shelter in place extended through May 31st. It is going to be different across the United States and around the world. So what does that sort of patchiness mean for Apple?
So again, I think the biggest influence that the stores play, I think, some analysts have put about, 30% of the revenue coming direct from Apple and maybe half of that coming direct from stores. So certainly the stores not being open is delaying purchases that consumers may have. But if we look at this timeline, Austria opened up, I believe, about 2 weeks ago. So depending on how you want to measure it, they could be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks ahead of us, here in the United States. But I think one of the things that you'll see is we're used to, and I live in the Bay Area also, we're used to walking by the Apple store on Union Square and just seeing like hundreds of people in that store, and that's going to look very different in the future. Consumers are used to walking in those stores, getting hands-on displays, they're crowded, there's lots of employees, and there's going to have to be a different, future of retail when we look at this in-store experience. Once you start to think about the, consumers maybe not being able to handle those devices, social distancing, masks, it's not going to have the same, I think, level of excitement or, just density of consumers as we've seen in the past. But I don't doubt that Apple will be creative and find a way to work around that.
Right. And we also did talk about the process of bringing employees back to work, how they're thinking about that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. I do want to get your thoughts, Julie, on really what I felt was the headline of this interview with Tim Cook, which is that they're already seeing things start to pick back up. It's not what, for example, Twitter mentioned earlier today when they reported their results. Facebook said that their ad sales were flat, so had potentially stabilized. Cook is saying things are already picking back up, but it's really this current quarter that is the real concern, where we're going to see the full force of this pandemic hit, especially coming from the United States and Europe. What's your takeaway from him giving us that little nugget?
Yeah, so I would trust him in what he says, because I think, the other thing that we saw retailers do is cut back on media spend or marketing during this time when, they didn't have the ability to deliver that product. And so I think, I'd definitely be optimistic, and they've got a good product lineup as we look forward. I think the other part of it is, too, is like Apple's big season is still about 6 months away. We're expecting to see new product launches this fall with availability short thereafter. And the really biggest quarter of the year for Apple tends to be in Q4. And so I think there's a lot that can happen. And I think we absolutely expect to see this economy and the stores reopen by then, when their biggest quarter is in front of them.